The real world, according to the Course, is not the world I see. It's not really the world I experience. And often it's referred to as an illusion. An illusion. This is where the rub is for me, and it's why I wanted to create a definition of this. Joanna and I have had many conflicting conversations about this, the illusion, because sometimes when it's talked about the real world, the world that we see around us, the physical, perceptual reality, it's called the illusion, and thus discounted. You know, and that illusion can include really basically everything that I don't like about what I'm experiencing in terms of a superficial application of the Course in Miracles. But you know, let's talk about this real world, this world of what sometimes we just refer to as an illusion. You know, the simplest thing that blows me away is that DNA, which is a sort of a fluid crystal, apparently a 60-mile long strand that's coiled up, wound up at a molecular level into every cell in a body, and that cell, every cell in any given body, these illusory bubbles called physical form, they determine its unique characteristics psychologically, physically for sure, its external forms. And this is, to just throw this away as illusion, and then you extrapolate out from there the capabilities, the products of these illusory, quote-unquote illusory bubbles interacting with each other in families, and then in communities, and in nations, and then in what we would call conspiratorial cabals of influence and moving groups and people in certain directions from hidden places. This is all generated out of an incredibly specific and quite absolutely miraculous structural system of some kind. I just recently was listening to Chris Langan, who has his theory, and I need to read his book, and I haven't done it yet. But he discusses, like, take a computer, and the computer has the computer itself, and then there's a keyboard, and then there's a screen. The screen is the presentation. The keyboard is some sort of access, but all of the rest of it is hidden. And my own place, the only place I deal with a computer is, you know, by touching and manipulating the keyboard to get whatever effects I have on the screen. But what's going on in the inside, I have no idea. And to my best understanding at this point, that's a way oversimplified version of how he views this world. That every leaf, every flower, every person is a manifestation on a screen. Each one is a screen of their own. And that he says that the problem with a theory of everything, that's about this world that we're in. The problem with most theories of everything is they want to exclude God, and in his terms, jam all of the contents of the world into the screen itself, and ignore the fact that the screen is simply a presentation. You know, the guts, the inside, the core, the mind of God, in terms of the Course in Miracles, requires outlets to be manifest. And those manifestations are in the form of a leaf, living or dead, attached to a tree or separated from the tree, a person at peace or in anxiety. These are presentations of this unseen intelligence, this unseen core of knowledge in the mind of God. Now, that's all the illusion, okay? That's an illusion. Now let's talk about what the real world might be. The real world is, according to the Course, obviously there's going to be no violence, there's no difficulty, there's no depression, it's all love, it's light and love, and all of these things. And you can hear how I'm talking about it, that I lose interest in trying to describe the real world because I get hung up, as Alan Watts said, with angels and harps. And it's much, much easier from our perspective, our vantage point, to describe the unreal world, the world of illusions, with its pain and difficulty and wars and betrayals, etc., violence, injustices, beauties, children being born, mothers and babies, these different, creative works of art. All of this kind of stuff is easier for us to describe than it is for us to go into the real world, which in the Course in Miracles says there's none of that here. That's not what we're experiencing. So let's try to go into the real world. I had my experience, and I'm going to say that I have to use this as a reference point, that I had an actual unique bounded experience that lasted about 30 minutes in a Catholic church, where I was, long story short, I was very frustrated, angry, bitter, resentful of the hypocrisy and I was really doing the Course. I was checking in with myself about how I really feel. I was exploring self-honesty, and that self-honesty was coming up with something that really resembled hatred of every square inch of everything I saw. And I said, give me your blessing, Holy Son of God, give me your blessing, Holy Son of God. I repeated this lesson that I grabbed from the Course in Miracles. I was not doing the Course at this time. I had done a really, really good job of it about a year earlier, 2 years earlier. And so I was very, very familiar with it. And I did a good job when I did it. And it was effective. I liked it, and it showed results. But here in this Catholic church in Sarasota, Florida, different life circumstances, different conditions. But I grabbed the Course because I recognized this level of comprehensive bitterness about the way the world is put together at a level of self-honesty, okay? I'm not trying to confess of being a sociopath or something like that. I'm suggesting that if we go into self-honesty, there's something less than unconditional love, way less, that we experience relative to every experience we have, every person we meet, everything. And this is the unreal world. This is what the Course is talking about, that has to be lost. So I'm given a vision, as a gift of the real world. And in that world, there was a unifying sense of recognition of all the people and even the things in it, whether it's a stained glass window or a person. It all had a degree of intelligent, impossible to describe, but that's the case, a kind of an intelligence. And this was really a progressive state of mind that began, it did progress quickly, to making me feel like I was dissolving into the happy dream, that everything that I was familiar with, and I'm anchored, being anchored in my ego, overcoming problems and struggles, all of this was falling away. All of it was becoming irrelevant. And that falling away, I could bear with it for about 20, 30 minutes. And when I started to feel the fear of the dissolution of the familiar, then I was returned to this, state of mind that we're in right now, with, where the people are not sort of translucent. They don't have a sort of an inner light. All these things that was true of this vision that I had, where people were light. It's like gravity wasn't what kept them on the earth. There wasn't a weightiness. There was no weight. Everything was transparent, and that includes the forces of nature. Everything seemed to move like things move on a screen, where, if a guy's swimming on a screen, there's no friction. He's not swimming through water. That's just an image. Well, that's how this was. Gravity didn't keep us down, and physical bodies weren't the determining factor of who or what anybody was. And it progressed and became very, very intense, and I write or talk about it elsewhere. And I'm going to say that was my introduction or glimpse of the real world. Now, what is the real world? Is it just a happy place away from the unhappy place, being the illusion? The illusion's unhappy and the real world is happy. A person can be left with that. And I want to go without, I already did this bit once. I already did it once, and Joanna listened to it and said, hey, you're not talking about the real world. I still don't know what the real world is. But, to say that it's happy and carefree and that everything's wonderful and all these kinds of things, it's difficult. I must say that the real world is, point for point, my decision to see God. Point for point. In other words, point for point, meaning everything in this world that I see has a formal reference that's above it. I guess this does get into the Platonic ideal forms. And that's something Chris Langan talks about as well, the necessity of having a Platonic vision of the world that we live in. In other words, there's a perfect version of it somewhere. And what we see is the manifestation of it. And any manifestation has to be less than the pure idea of it, whether it's a table or a leaf or a person or a personality. So the Platonic vision of perfection, we gaze up towards that, and we don't spend time talking about the real world against the illusion. The illusion is pretending that what I see is the limit of what is there. What I see is what I get. That is not the case with the Platonic vision, the ideal forms that I think the real world has something in common with. This is to say that that person over there is the Christ. In fact, all people are the Christ. And if you follow the face of Christ forward from you, and it has to be a vision where you drop an insistence that the people in the world are separate beings with all of their separate problems. None of that goes away. But if you follow this forward, and it's a willingness to see the face of Christ, and therefore see the manifestations, the so many manifestations of that face in the form of the stocker at a grocery store, the checkout person at the grocery store, the guy who cut you off in traffic, your own vision in a mirror, you all of these, and then you look around, cars on streets on roads, all of these things, there's a lack of judgment. Obviously, you can go into the nightmare that this all has. There's a narrative nightmare that goes with the whole, development in this world. That's not what this is about. It's not about becoming realistic in that way. Even though, getting in that realism of the way this world unfolded, about the truth of the pioneers and what they really did to the Indians, or what we really did in World War II, these things can lead to a richer appreciation of the perfect world by following them and being always willing to look for the face of Christ. It's an upward gaze to heaven, instead of a downward gaze into what we would call the reality. I'm looking upward to something I don't know. Since I don't know it, and there's not a history book or a narrative that can tell me about it, the upward gaze is the same as like tuning in, my term, tuning into the Holy Spirit as an upsurgence, as a natural movement of perception, a natural movement upward to the face of Christ, the presence of God, that manifestation. And if you even look in the Bhagavad Gita, they talk about the tree of knowledge being an upside-down tree with its roots above and its branches below, so that all of us and the things and all of us down here are the branches and the variations, the branching mechanism, but that the tree itself is rooted. And if you follow the life-giving sap, which comes down from the roots and moves through the branches into the leaves, and you follow the sap upward to the root, these faces of Christ in all these individuals that you see like leaves, they start to collapse into one image, and I'm lost in that image. Call it the beatific vision in Christian terms, or call it samadhi in yoga terms. But it's a collapsing of consciousness onto the one, instead of a blowing out of consciousness into the many. So when I look, but in the Course in Miracles, the thing about the Course that's, I think, brilliant genius actually, is that it gives me a way to say, I open myself to this upwelling of perception, the proper flow of perception from me and my situation into this real world. It's an upflowing of perception into that world. It's a natural movement. And to go against it, we could call Satanism. You feel that flow and you say, no, I'm going down to the roots of the matter. I'm going to go down into the illusion to find the power of what makes the manifest world. No, the Course is saying, no, go with the proper grain, the direction of the grain of the mind of God, which is an upwelling of perception to the real world, which would be heaven or the happy dream. And so you first experience the happy dream from this. Like I'm in my, let's say, nightmare world of however you want to describe it, grim realities. And then I dispose myself. I say, Holy Spirit, Jesus, Christ, the teacher with a capital T in the Course, whatever entity you want to give it, and say, lead me upward. You need this guide. The guide has to be there because I've never been there before. And when you've never been there before, you stumble, you fall, you don't know, you're stuck in fear. So a guide makes it much, much, much easier to go forward in this, and that guide is available in terms of the invitation. I want to go upward. I want my perception corrected into this upward movement. And when that happens, there are instances called miracles where I begin to see healings of those perceptions. And that leads to the happy dream, where things seem happy, like I'm at a big happy picnic or something. One can't stop there. Those are just manifest effects. It's nice. It's not the purpose of the Course. It can be an obstacle to, what do you call it, plateau, to plateau at the level of, what I deride as parking angels, or the little miracles that happen in my life. These little miracles are fabulously important to reinforce my understanding of the real thing I'm involved in terms of this upwelling and this movement into the real world, where there is this lack of conflict. There are these ideal forms. There is the mind of God. There is perfection there. And that the aspect of living in this world is one of reforming that. It says in the Course that the only creativity here is healing. The only creativity available to a human being is to heal. And what's healing? Look around. Anything in my life that I think is less than great, less than perfect, less than healed, whether it's family relationships, situations that happened decades ago, whatever it is, whatever I look at, could be wars, it could be difficulties out there. It's asking me to look on these things with loving eyes, which, by the way, I don't have. What I do have are my own eyes, and those, in terms of the Course, I sort of close inwardly and say, open my eyes, let the Holy Spirit, which is the upwelling, to get off the idea that it's a bird or some sort of an entity that's doing this, even though it is an entity, it is an intelligence, there's no doubt. None of this could happen. None of the world could be here without this intelligence. But let's look at it as the grain, the movement upward, and that this Spirit pulls me up into the happy dream by allowing it to come into me, and therefore the happy dream emerges. And once I see the happy dream, then I'm able, that's the healed perception of where I used to think that that person was a moron or a stick in the mud or whatever. And for some reason, an inner light is there. And the inner light is in me, but it's cast onto that person, reflected back to me, and I see something beautiful there. It does happen. It does happen, and it happens quickly. And what I would say to some people, and Joanna doesn't agree with me, or at least this isn't her experience, is there can be some fear of the loss of what we know. I know I've been somewhat cynical. A lot of it's learned, of bumping into things, then saying, "Oh, now I understand what's going on here." So I've got an adult or a calcified form of cynicism about a lot of things in the world and what's possible and how people act and all this kind of thing, and who I am in it and what the possibilities are of that. Those are all judgments and stuck, calcified, frozen, crystallized places. And the Course is asking me to let those go. Okay, let's put those up on the table and say, let them be gone. And they will be removed. They will be, the stuck places will be unstuck. It says it in the Bible. The valleys will be filled and the high places will be taken down to make straight the way of the Lord. And the way of the Lord in this thing is the mind of God coming to me. It's a natural process. It wants to be here. But I have to quit maintaining this rigid sort of system that I've got here, like it's some sort of incredibly high maintenance relationship or an incredibly high maintenance formal Victorian garden of some sort where it's like 24/7. I've got to keep the illusion alive. When I invite the Holy Spirit in, there is the movement up, things relax, there are moments. And I say my experience, and that's all I can speak to, is that it does happen. And my experience is also that it leads to a certain sort of nervousness, and that the level of obstacles then becomes internal. How much of my world am I going to lose? Well, down the road a piece, all of it. It's painful to say that, but down the road a piece, everything that I've cherished here will go away and be replaced by these ideal and platonic forms, which since I don't know what they are, and I love, in my own way, even the aches and pains that I feel here, the difficulties that I feel here, I'm possessive of all of it. Because of that, the beckon and the movement towards the real world can be frightening. But this Holy Spirit is it's a real deal, and it is, because there's a grain here. That's okay. Let me back off of all that into the nightmare, the illusion that we're in. It begins with the Big Bang. It's supported with the scientific method. All of these are necessary ways that we're given, authoritative means, to see our world as random, without true value, true grain, true movement in a particularized direction. We're left with a sort of a random sense of things happening. This is a necessary mythology to keep the illusion, the /nightmare, intact. It's necessary for that. So all of the scientific way of looking at, quote-unquote scientific, definitely all the so-called atheistic, there's no coincidence that most voices that we know, and that even includes someone like a Douglas Hofstadter, who I like a lot, tend to be atheistic, or at least non-theistic. They don't want to go there, because they don't want to admit that there's an a priori grain, that there's something here that we have to admit was here before we were, that, in other words, that we had a creator. They want to see it as somehow manifesting out of itself by some process. So all of the things that we have here support what is here. So to accept the Course in Miracles charge, to accept the challenge, the invitation to the real world, that place of platonic beauty, of things existing only in their perfection, in the mind of God, in the most beautiful dance possible, that kind of beauty, that kind of poetry and art, creativity, that's native to human reality here, us, the happy dream. That's the term the Course uses, the happy dream. In other words, it's still an illusion, but it's closer to this mind of God. This is so precious, so available, but it involves sort of surfing on that Holy Spirit energy that's in this upsurgence. So at this point, let's see if we can experience it. I mean, that's all I can really say at this point is to offer an invitation to myself. That's who I'm talking to now. I'm me and my little microphone, and so let's experience it, and let's be brave enough to lose who we are. Let's be brave enough to lose the nightmare, and to extend the beauty of what's up there somewhere in these roots that are above, and the sap that's coming down from the mind of God in terms of the Vedic tree of Maya, to allow this to nurture us, and that nurturing then allows us to extend this to everything and everybody in our world. Not because necessarily we want to heal everything, that's a nice thought, but so that I myself am healed. I myself, it's not like I want to become Mother Teresa and rescue every child from a trash can in India. It's that I want this healing for myself in the simple faith that it radiates out from me. So at that point, a person in faith has to deal with whatever their doubts are, whatever their reservations are. And I'd say all reservations can be dealt with, all doubts can be dispensed with. And thank you so much for listening to me. And I hope that I got my my point across on what the real world is, which is diametrically opposed to a world of struggle and difficulty. And it's here in an instant. What does it say in Handel's Messiah, which is a quote from one of the Psalms? In an instant, in the twinkling of an eye, the Lord arrives. It's not a process. It's an absolute shift in perception. I'm looking into the dark, and there's two rooms. There's a darkened room and a bright room. I'm standing at the door frame. That's the Course in Miracles. I'm standing in the door frame. It's inviting me. Take your gaze from the darkened room, rotate yourself 180 degrees, and look into the bright room. I haven't moved, really. I've only rotated in place. And then that makes it so that the darkened room, goes away as an agenda, and instead the agenda becomes the brightened room. Thank you very much. Have a great day.